Lebanon has officially signed a request for assistance from the International Monetary Fund to help fix the country's crippling financial problems. It is one of the main parts of a sweeping economic plan the government says will help save Lebanon from bankruptcy. But here's why it is just a recipe for disaster. The Lebanese government's decision to request help from the IMF means the state decided to ask the IMF to set its list of conditions that qualifies Lebanon for a loan. The conditions of the IMF are clear in its previous reports on Lebanon. The first of which is to reduce the size of the public sector. The public sector in Lebanon is divided into military, public education instructors, and public sector employees. Since no one would dare touch the military, and since the public sector already has a vacancy rate greater than 50%, public education instructors becomes the main target here. Targeting public education instructors means returning the public school to the days when there were more than 40 students in one class. This will lead to a decline in the quality of public education and push the people towards the system of private schools that they are already trying to escape from. Also among the IMF conditions is reducing spending on health, which automatically means reducing what the Ministry of Health pays to cover hospitalization of those who have no insurance or social security and who are among the most vulnerable. The IMF bailout is not a gift, but rather a debt provided to finance the balance of payments deficit, that is, to finance imports primarily. Is this what the Lebanese economy really needs? The risk from such funds originates from the government using the loan to pay up for losses incurred by the banking sector, to sustain the older debt, and to finance importing goods and services rather than enhancing local industries. If such a loan is approved, it will no doubt be at the expense of investment in production, economic advancement, unemployment reduction, and spending on social safety networks. Above all, this loan will also mean that nothing has really changed in the country's political system, merely a continuation of previous policies that led to the current financial crisis. Welcome to the Mideastream. I'm Marwa Osman. Lebanon plans to seek International Monetary Fund aid after approving an economic rescue plan, setting out vast losses in its financial system as it aims to chart a way out of a crisis seen as the biggest risk to stability since the 1975-1990 civil war. Many are skeptic that the IMF conditions will only make things worse. To discuss this issue with us from Beirut is Ali Murad, political commentator. Thank you for being with us, Ali. Now, the situation in Lebanon is a bit confusing here, but rooted in decades of state waste, corruption, bad governance in this the governments that have passed through the passed on Lebanon for 30 years now. The crisis is causing mounting economic hardships on all of the Lebanese and fueling unrest as the oligarchy plans to buy the public sector and maybe control more of the Lebanese political arena. Now, are the Lebanese at a point where they really have no option available other than actually going and asking the IMF for such a loan?
Thank you for having me. First of all, let's be clear. The plan, the so-called economic plan of the new government didn't say that we only have this option. It's true they signed for the assistance of the IMF, asking their assistance officially, but they said that our plan is open for discussions, and they said that it would be updated more than a time. But they put the main title that we cannot save the Lebanese economy unless we have loans by billions. We're talking about $10 to $15 billion. The problem is that Lebanon has few options here. Either go to the IMF or go to friendly countries to have loans. Countries like China, Russia, maybe Iran, or any other Arab states, like as the Prime Minister said earlier, Kuwait and Qatar. are interested in funding Lebanon, providing some loans. But it wouldn't be sufficient because Lebanon's financial problem is a big one. We in Lebanon we import by $3 billion, and we export by $3 billion, and we import by $20 billion. That's a $70 billion deficit. So I believe that the problem in Lebanon cannot be solved without borrowing billions of dollars from foreign funders, whether it was IMF or any other countries. We prefer that we have loans from friendly countries, but I think the current situation now with the coronavirus and the financial and the economic problems attacking the countries friendly and other countries, I think it's difficult for those countries to come and pay those billions in the time that their own economy needs them.
Well, the Prime Minister of Lebanon, Hassan Diab, said that his government has prepared a 53-page rescue plan that says the economy is in free fall. Well, that's not new. Anyone in Lebanon can actually know that. And an international financial rescue package is urgently needed. This is what he said. But is Lebanon capable of coping with the very tough conditions that usually accompany any kind of an IMF loan? We have seen multiple countries take IMF loans and they are in a disastrous situation, worse than when they actually asked for the loan. Can this small country cope with this?
As you mentioned in your report, the conditions of the IMF are quite clear, and they are the same actually in every case with every country that goes to the IMF. If you take, for example, Indonesia, if you take Greece, if you take Argentina, there are a lot of examples here to take some points to use with the case of Lebanon now going to the IMF. I believe that there are forces inside the government and outside the government that support this government. They are quite aware that during the negotiations phase, they would say no to the IMF, because when you ask the government to get rid of tens of thousands of teachers in the public sector, educational sector, and if you go to the medical sector and you say you have to reduce your funding to the healthcare system, it would be difficult for the people to cope with these conditions, and the government cannot afford to take this burden on their shoulders. So I believe that the negotiations would have some troubles in the future. I don't think that Lebanon can accept some conditions to be imposed by the IMF. Lebanon still has some few steps that can be done outside the need to go borrow money. They can work with the judicial system to get back some billions that were smuggled outside the country when the oligarchic political elite was ruling this country during the 30 years that passed. So there are some steps that Prime Minister Hassan Diab and his government can do that would help the economy, but it wouldn't be sufficient. We still need some more help from friends. So yes, maybe we can have a substitute from the IMF. We cannot afford to say yes to the IMF concerning our sovereignty, our obligations to help the public. You got like 40% is the rate today of the poverty. Unemployment is at its highest rates. So I don't think that it has this privilege, the government of Hassan Diab, to go forward with anything the IMF would ask from the government.
Well, there's something that should be looked into, and that happened immediately after the government of Hassan Diab took office, is that they defaulted on the sovereign debt in March. That was the first time Lebanon defaulted on a foreign debt.
Yes.
What is it that makes the current Prime Minister so sure that this will not happen again? I mean, if it happens before, why wouldn't it happen again when we actually, as a country, take that loan?
Well, if you take the what happened in March as an example, it's true that countries can do it anytime they can't pay. So I think that in the plan that the government has provided days ago, it says that during those two years, what is left of the year 2020 and year 2021, we won't be able to pay any dollar to the for our debt. They are saying that starting from year 2022 and above, maybe at 2023, all the Eurobonds debt would be postponed to be paid within those 2 years. They are planning to make use of the billions, the 10 or 15 billions that would be paid to Lebanon to invest in the productive sectors, talking about the industries, agriculture, and the services sector.
Maybe to boost the import sector in Lebanon. But the issue is that, as you said at the beginning, that we are entering into a global recession. So that's another challenge for this government. But to restore the central bank strength in order to get all of this done, Prime Minister Hassan Diab's economic plan called for something very important, which is the creation of a public asset management company, which is holding key government assets that would, excluding obviously the oil and gas, but the profits of which would fund central bank capital increases. Is this actually a viable option here, or rather there might be a better scenario?
I think that it's a way that Mr. Diab is trying to control the policies of the central bank, because during the last weeks we saw the tension that took place between Prime Minister Hassan Diab and the governor of the central bank, Riyad Salami. I think that the central bank is trying to impose himself as a sovereign body that even the Lebanese government cannot control the way he works. And we all know that all the disasters now in the financial system and the economic crisis is caused by the policies that were taken by the banking sector. And on top of this comes the policies of Riyad Salami, the governor of the central bank, because what Riyad Salami has done to the financial system in Lebanon would take years and years to solve. So maybe this is the way Mr. Diab is trying to control the way that the central bank controls or manages the financial crises. And I believe that excluding the oil and gas sector from this company to be provided in this fund, I think it's a good step, because you know a lot of forces inside Lebanon are saying that they were planning actually to invest in the oil and gas sector.
They're actually eyeing the profits of the oil and gas
for
companies.
More corruption.
I would love to discuss that more with you, inshallah, in a different episode. Sure. Mr. Ali Murad, thank you for being with us, political commentator from Beirut, to discuss the financial crisis in Lebanon. Please stay tuned for our next segment. At least 10 Iraqi fighters from the Popular Mobilization Forces, also known as Hashd al-Sha'bi, have been martyred in an attack on Saturday by the Daesh Takfiri terrorists in Iraq's Salahuddin province. Popular Mobilization Forces have since then taken control of the area in preparation for a possible retaliatory attack. ISIS hits Iraq again in this following report. At least 10 members of the Popular Mobilization Forces known as Hashd al-Sha'bi have been martyred in a coordinated attack carried out by the ISIS terrorist group known as Daesh in Iraq's Salahuddin province. According to Iraqi state media, early on Saturday, May 2, clashes erupted between the Popular Mobilization Forces and ISIS on several fronts in the town of Nakishfa and in the city of Balad. Several were wounded in clashes between the two sides as the Popular Mobilization Forces managed to push back ISIS after the arrival of air and land reinforcements in the area. The coordinated assault is believed to be one of the largest ISIS attacks since the armed group was defeated in December 2017. ISIS remnants who conduct sporadic attacks against Iraqi security forces and civilians alike with increasing regularity seems to be now attempting to regroup and wage a new era of its reign of terror and destruction in the country. Following the United States assassination of Iran's top anti-terror commander Lieutenant General Qasem Soleimani and Popular Mobilization Forces Deputy Commander Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis in the capital city of Baghdad, Daesh has intensified its attacks in Iraq. Meanwhile, the United States and Israel have repeatedly attacked the positions of the Popular Mobilization Forces and its affiliated groups and killed dozens of their members. The Popular Mobilization Forces has long rejected Washington's military presence in the country as an obstacle impeding long-lasting security and stability in Iraq. Iraqi resistance groups have vowed to take up arms against U.S. forces if Washington fails to comply with a parliamentary order calling for the expulsion of U.S. troops following the assassination. The U.S.-led military coalition has recently started evacuating its troops from a number of bases in Iraq, handing the bases over to the Iraqi military. In the meantime, Iraqis are worried for the fate of their country after so many of the Iraqi security forces, including Popular Mobilization Forces, were killed. It is a reminder that Iraq needs constant counter-terrorism efforts, the likes of which the so-called US-led coalition failed to provide. On the contrary, the coalition has so far all but countered Daesh terrorism while effectively targeting the only force capable of eliminating Daesh from Iraq, the Popular Mobilization Forces. To discuss this issue with us from Tehran is Dr. Mohammad Marandi, professor at Tehran University. Thank you very much for being with us, Professor Marandi. Now, following the United States assassination of Iran's top anti-terror commander, Lieutenant General Qasem Soleimani, and the deputy head of the PMU, commander, the martyr, Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, in the capital city of Baghdad at the beginning of this year, Daesh has intensified all of its attacks against Iraq. Meanwhile, we see the US, we see Israel attacking positions of the PMU and other resistance factions all across Iraq and sometimes even in Syria. Do you think that is a coincidence?
Well, we have to take into account that ISIS has had US support through its proxies and allies in the region from early on in the conflict in Syria. We know from the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency document of 2012 that U.S. allies in the region, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and others, the Emirates, as well as Kuwait, they were all cooperating together to create a Salafist entity between Syria and Iraq in order to isolate Syria. And we also know that the head of the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency at that time, General Michael Flynn, admitted in an interview on Al Jazeera, of all places, that the United States took a willful decision to support that policy. So the United States was indirectly supporting ISIS, just as it's doing right now in Idlib today, and just as the United States has been working with Saudi Arabia to starve Yemen, and they know quite well that the Saudis have been working with al-Qaeda. So the fact that the Americans are allowing ISIS to thrive again in Iraq and on the border between Iraq and Syria and in Syria shouldn't come as a surprise. In fact, when the Americans bombed the Hashad forces in retaliation to an alleged attack on an American base where an American was killed, and it later came out that ISIS actually carried out that attack, they murdered 30 Hashad troops, Iraqi troops, fighting ISIS on the border with Syria, the Iraqi border with Syria. So instead of striking targets near the American base for the alleged attack, in retaliation, they went and struck Iraqi forces 500 kilometers away. Why? Because they wanted to weaken Iraq on its borders with Syria in order to help ISIS revive. So this is a part of the ongoing dirty war that the U.S. has been carrying out in this region, as it does in other parts of the world, the Contra rebels in Nicaragua. It's nothing really extraordinary that the United States is playing so dirty.
But there's a very vital question here, that no organized terror group can just function by itself. It needs money, it needs weaponry. And the vital question that keeps rises again is, who is that in position that's giving money and weaponry to this terrorist group? You spoke about certain regional allies of the U.S., but we saw a couple of videos for the past 2 days showing U.S. flights aiding ISIS in Iraq. What do you say about that?
Well, again, U.S. allies in the region, or U.S. proxies in the region, are an extension of the United States. They are no different. So whether the Americans move them around with helicopters or the Americans lead this campaign where the Saudis and the Turks and the Qataris and the Kuwaitis and the Emiratis are involved and the Israelis are involved, it really doesn't make a difference. So right now, alongside all these same allies that were involved since the beginning of Syria, the Americans right now have the same allies. So these so-called allies or proxies, they are continuing with their support of ISIS. But also the United States, according to Iraqi intelligence, according to the Hashad, the Americans are actively supporting these groups. Now, of course, the Americans are going to deny it, and they're going to say this is outrageous. But the Americans were ignoring and hiding the facts about their relationship to the conflict in Syria for many years, and to do so even today, despite the WikiLeaks documents, despite admissions made by the former Secretary of State Kerry that the United States allowed ISIS to advance on Damascus, despite the fact that the former Vice President Biden admitted at Harvard University that U.S. allies were directly funding ISIS. This is all out in the open. But if you go and tell Americans that they are actively supporting ISIS, they'll say this is just conspiracy theories. But the realities on the ground speak for themselves.
There's another issue in Iraq about the new Iraqi Prime Minister, Mustafa al-Kadhimi, taking his time to maybe formulate the government, and he is trying to before next week. This is what he's saying. But can this actually be some sort of a message to the new prime minister that you either be with us or you're definitely against us?
Well, that's what the Americans have been doing all along. The Americans, for example, have been sanctioning Iraqis and Iranians who do business with each other. The Americans are threatening Iraqis with sanctions if they continue to do trade with Iran. But overwhelmingly, the majority of the Iraqi population resides near the Iranian border. There are 1,250 kilometers of border between the two countries, and most major Iraqi cities are within 100 kilometers of the Iranian border. So the Americans are trying to punish Iran, but they're trying to punish the Iraqis as well. So they're saying either you do as we say, or you will suffer the consequences. And so the consequences, it means the destruction of the Iraqi economy, instability in the country, the rise of extremism, the same extremists that the Saudis had been funding even before Syria. The Iraqi prime minister at that time, Nouri al-Maliki, was saying, and this is before Syria, before 2011, that ISIS, at that time the Islamic State of Iraq, was being funded by Saudi Arabia. So the Americans knew this at the time.
So you're saying, Dr. Marandi, you're saying here that the significance of such an attack, especially because it happened at a very close, if you will, region to the capital, Baghdad. Salah ad-Din Governorate is proximity to the capital. So you think that what you're saying is that Iraqis now must be concerned for their fate because of the U.S.?
Well, I think that if the Iraqis pull together, if they remain united, the United States is on the decline. And even in Lebanon, I believe the same is true. The United States is imposing maximum pressure on Lebanon, on Iraq. It's failed in Syria, it's failed in Yemen. But we have to keep in mind that U.S. allies in this region are in deep trouble. They are fighting against each other, the Turks and the Qataris on the one side, the Saudis and the Emiratis on the other. All of them are facing economic crisis because of the situation, the collapse of oil, the Turks because of the collapse of the global economy and tourism and the all the different industries that are in deep trouble. And the United States is in deep trouble itself, and many believe that the United States is moving towards a long depression followed by a long-term recession, and the U.S. dollar may actually fall dramatically. So if the Iraqis remain united, if the Lebanese remain united and steadfast, I think that it's the other side that is in the long term in much deeper trouble than the people of Iraq or Lebanon.
Well, I want to thank you very much, Dr. Mohammed Marandi, professor at Tehran University, for joining us to talk about the latest ISIS attacks against Iraq and the Popular Mobilization Forces. Thank you for your contribution, and please stay tuned for more next week from the Mideastream.